Hi YouTube, back with another homestead questions video. So this week is a common question that we get asked all the time, and it's what do I need to live off-grid? A lot of people have asked this question, and so we thought we'd do a video
You need a tent.
on it. Now, off-grid depends on like your version of what you're doing as off-grid. You can always like live off grid in the middle of nowhere and like completely savage it.
Yeah, and there, no, honestly, in our community here, there are people that when they first moved out here, they lived in a tent. So, like, it's not unheard of, but...
Yeah, to be able to do that. To just live in a tent and
like,
build
with kids
something from scratch.
and stuff like that. So, like...
And making food and everything
in the northern
else.
climates,
Yeah.
so, like, it can be done.
I can't imagine. I'm very grateful that we have a house. But point being, what do I need to live off grid? So that's kind of the common question that we get asked. So we're taking it back to the basics. Now, depending on your version of like off grid, if you want to live in a tent, then fine. You don't really need much. But in terms of living what you might call like a modern off grid lifestyle, there's 4 basic things that we have kind of come up with as to what is important for those, for the major sort of things that you can't really get along without. Regardless of whether you're living in a tent or whether you're living on a modern sort of homestead or off-grid sort of situation. So the first one is a basic human need, and it's water. You have to make sure that wherever you are living off-grid that you have a source of water. So whether that is something that is a pond, which you'd have to maintain, of course, it has to have a water supply to be able to maintain that pond, or if it's a lake, if it's a well, if it's a spring source, that would be the best, of course, because if it's a spring, then it's ideally not going to dry up, depending on where it's coming from.
Water collection,
yeah, or a water collection system, which would then be from like your rainwater or whatever, whatever is coming off of kind of the environment. So wherever you live, you're going to need that water source because water is a basic human need. You can't get away with not having it. So water is something to definitely consider. And we talk about water a little bit later. We'll talk about water a little bit later when we get to other things. Mm-hmm. That would be your number one objective.
Absolutely.
Would be to get water.
Yeah. Your number 2 option, or I guess your number 2 choice, necessity would be food. So obviously water and food go hand in hand. Food, many people, when they go off grid, you're not going to have the day-to-day conveniences that you have. So you have to be a lot more self-sustainable. You have to have the I'm doing it myself mentality. So growing your own food is a huge one. Now you can buy your own food, but now you also need to consider how are you going to store it? Are you using freezers? Are you using a root cellar? Are you fermenting? Are you canning? What are you doing with all that? And how often are you going to be going in for supplies? So all that comes into play when you are looking to go off grid. So food, another thing you could be looking at is hunting, fishing, foraging for food. So what is your skill set at with any of those things that come into play as well? I think that covers the basics on that.
Yeah, in terms of food.
We don't have to get into what you got to plant food.
Yeah, that's not the purpose of this video.
Yes.
So yeah, first thing being water, second thing being food, your third thing being money. This is something that a lot of people overlook, and there's this like myth or this like conception for some reason that when you live off grid, you don't need money. Now, I guess if you're living in a tent and you're like completely savaging it and you're like out in the middle of the wilderness,
you need very little.
You need very little, I suppose. Like bills don't matter, like things don't matter because you're just struggling to survive, or maybe not struggling, but you're just surviving every day, right? You live very much in the present. However, if you want to have any sort of off-grid lifestyle that is, I would say, long-term and sustainable and some sort of pleasant, you're gonna need money. Now, Andre mentioned, with food, like you can buy your food. Even if you're not buying your food and you're growing your food, if you're going to live off grid, unless you're vegan or vegetarian, and you're not really looking at getting into meat, if you're going to raise animals, now you can free range your animals. We do that quite often, but you have to take into account that there's winter months, or you can't free range.
Depending on where you live.
Yeah, depending on where you live, but there's not necessarily going to be the option to forage your animals. If you live off grid and have animals, there's not going to be that option to forage them necessarily 12 months out of 12. You might get like 10 months out of 12 or 11 months out of 12 if you're really lucky. But that's something to consider. If you are not going to be using money for any other purpose, I would say that feeding your animals would be something that's important. Something else you would need money for, and I'm all about, self-sufficiency and self-sustainability, but things that you might need to buy. Even if you make your clothes from scratch and you, just with a needle and thread, you still need to buy said needle and you still need to buy said thread. Ideally, you would have a sewing machine. Even if you just buy a sewing machine, you're going to need money to buy said sewing machine. It's very difficult to get along in this world without money. How are you going to buy food supplies that you can't grow, that you literally can't grow? You can grow sugar in the form of stevia, but as far as I know, at last I checked, you can't grow yeast. Flour you could technically grow, because I know that you can make it from certain plants and things, but are you going to grow it in the quantities that you need it, depending on how large your family is, how large your community, if you have a community, how large your community's needs are. Flour would be something that you can't really grow in large quantities. Yeast would be something, or make. Yeast would be something that you can't really grow in large quantities. Salt is something that you can't grow, as far as I know.
You can't grow salt. You have to mine salt.
You have to mine salt, exactly. And then sugar, right? Now, those are the 4 basic things that I would say are the basic food staples to be able to make things, even if you make things from scratch. I make a lot of our food from scratch, and those are the 4 basic staples that you need. Like I said, you can get away without sugar, you can grow stevia and stuff like that, but that's something that you're gonna need to get. So looking at things that there's ways to minimize the amount of money that you're spending when you live off grid, but you do still need money. So that's something to consider if you're moving off grid. What is your source of income going to be if you're living off grid?
Absolutely. And also, just a little side note on that, your source of income when you come off grid or go off grid, and it's kind of a spin-off onto the next thing as well, is I'll kind of combine the last one necessity with the money here, is when people think of money, especially if you're moving into a community of an older generation where they only know hard labor or time for money, you have to put in actual hands-on work to make money, you don't have that option there. You don't have that anymore. We have the internet, so there's so many ways that you can make money online. And I'm not saying to do a job, right? There is affiliate marketing, there is drop shipping, there is setting up a store on a website, which, hint, hint, something might be coming up on this channel. There's so many different ways that you can make money online these days that doesn't require you to be just even at your computer 8 hours a day, let alone a set amount of time or a specific amount of time. So that brings me to my next one that isn't a necessity, but it's nice to have, is power. So power,
sense of actual electricity.
Electricity, yes.
Not as power as in this abstract concept of control.
So power as in electricity to run things a blender, coffee maker, your lights in the house. Unless you want candles, like whatever suits your fancy.
Or kerosene oil.
Yeah, absolutely. But if you want to do things online and stuff like that, you're going to need to run a router. You're going to need to charge your laptop. You're going to need power day and night. So it'd be nice to have a couple systems in place. So you can either run generators, so you can get gas, propane, diesel, which is your top ones.
And then you're looking at money.
And so you're looking at money to buy those things. You're looking at a solar system that needs to be installed. If you're looking for something that can last you a decent while, like a 24, 48 hour period without a good charge for solar, you're looking at probably about $3,000 or $10,000 for a decent setup. You can also do hydroelectric power, which runs off water. Now that brings us back to the very first part. What's your water source? Are you running off a stream? Because if you have a pond, you're not going to get much power off standing water. You need an actual running water source. Wind is another thing, and that's actually something that we're going to be installing this year also, because we noticed in the winter months that the solar system, yes, it does work, but on our shorter days, it isn't suffice for what we need, especially if we're running a heat lamp to keep our chickens warm, our rabbits warm, whatever it is that we have for animals. But we did notice that we have wind come the winter. And even in the summer we have it, so on a cloudy day we can take wind on. But again, that costs money to go on, to get. So, and if you're going with the generator route, well, then you're going to have consistent money output, because you're going to be buying the fuel that runs it, plus the oil changes and the filters and the maintenance that goes along
and just
with
the
all
gas
that.
prices these days.
And depending on where you live, if you don't know how to make your own fuel and stuff like that, you're going to have to buy all that stuff too, right? If you're looking at buying a diesel generator these days, you might not want to buy a brand new one. You might want to, because they're going to require the DEF fluid in them. So you might want to look at something that's a little older, that's I think 2008, I think it is. And don't quote me.
2006, I think.
Could be one of those, somewhere in
something
there.
In the early 2000s.
In there, you guys figure it out. But yeah, look at something finding a little older that you don't have to buy DEF. That is an older engine. You can run straight diesel. So there are many options out there for power. And if you want to make money off grid and not have to leave your property, you're going to need power.
Power's a must.
And then internet, and that requires money to pay for.
So it's all connected. It is all
it's
connected.
all connected.
These are kind of these are our general tips on what sort of things you would need, just as the basics for living off grid. Now this is more of a modern off grid sort of setup. We for sure don't live in the 1800s. I do cooking on a wood stove and stuff like that, so we don't necessarily require electricity for like an electric stove or things like that.
All those things are required, but there's a lot more subcategories that are off of that you need to learn
precisely
and do and have and stuff. So those are your main, just to like exist and have systems in place. Those would be like our 4 top sort of things, I think, and the 4 basic sort of items or tangible sort of products that you would need. And some of them can be provided with nature. Money obviously can't be provided with nature unless you're going to cut down trees and make counterfeit money, but that's a different story. Those are our 4 things, guys. Thank you so much for listening and appreciate the views. Make sure you hit that like button and subscribe if you want more details. See you on the next one. That's it.
Perfect. Sounds good.
Oh, we didn't record that.
It wasn't recording?
I'm kidding.